Dear colleagues, good morning to everyone from all over Europe. It's great to see you here. Thank you for joining us in another edition of the Erasmus Goes Digital webinar. Um, we can start. We see here already that you have some questions about the webinar and starting, so we will start right ahead. Sorry for the short delay. So today we are going to give you once again some updates about the Erasmus Go Digital, the Erasmus Without Paper initiative and the Erasmus Student Card initiative, of course. So we have with us dear colleagues as panelists from the European Commission and the Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture is Bruno de Oliveira Alves, who is the Erasmus Student Card initiative team leader. We also have our colleague Harpa Sif Arnastotir, EWP Relationship Manager from the Commission as well. João Bacelar from the European University Foundation, who is an EWP Plus Manager, and Daiga Kuzmane from the European University Foundation as well, an EWP Plus Manager as well. Tibor Toth from the consortium, the EWP Plus. And of course, colleagues from the European Student Card Project and a lot, Antonio Soeiro from Entity Data, who is the Erasmus Student Card Communication and Training from the team from Communication and Training, and also Natalia Sanz Huguet from Entity Data, who is an Erasmus Student Card Governance team member. So I think we can start right ahead. With the updates. In this webinar, the agenda is the following. We will have some policy updates from the Commission. Then it will be followed by a short update for the European Student Card. Then we will have a feedback from the the user consultation on the learning agreements. And last but not least, we will have also the mandatory business requirements for the nomination as a transcript of records. So stay with us. Bruno, good morning, and the floor is yours for the policy updates from the Commission side.
Thank you, Nikos. Thank you for organizing the webinar, and thank you to all the participants as well for joining us this morning. I hope you will benefit from yet another webinar and another update on the European Student Card Initiative, and in particular on the Erasmus Without Paper. So I will, if you allow me, I will dive right into the policy update, and I apologize to some of you who may have already who are already familiar with what I'm about to show you, but I want to start by showing you by telling you what are our objectives from a policy perspective for this year, for 2024. So the first message or the first takeaway that I want to convey to you is that for 2024, our focus is really on supporting higher education institutions, adopting the existing processes in Erasmus Without Paper. So here I'm talking in particular of the European Student Identifier, of the interinstitutional agreement, and of the digital learning agreements. So our focus is on supporting adoption of those existing processes, and it is not on developing new processes. So what this means in practice is that we want to ensure this year, when it comes to interinstitutional agreements, that every higher education institution has got access to the new IIA API. So as some of you know, the version 7 was deployed relatively recently. Some higher education institutions' in-house systems are still ongoing testing. We're working very closely with them to make sure that this new version is adopted by all higher education institutions, and I will tell you a little bit more about that in the coming slides. The other and the major focus really of our work in 2024 will be on increasing the exchange of digital learning agreements that are concluded through the Erasmus Without Paper network. Some of you may be familiar with an activity that we started this year, which includes the preparation of country-by-country reports on the levels of digitalization of learning agreements, per higher education institution and per country. And what we found in those country reports was that there was still a significant amount of progress to be achieved. So there's still some way to go to ensure that we achieve that critical mass of higher education institutions exchanging digitally the learning agreements. And until this happens, until we reach that critical mass, we think that higher education institutions will not really reach the full potential of the digitalization process. And so this is why it's so important for us in 2024 to really focus on supporting AGIs using the EWP digital tools to exchange learning agreements. And as I said, through our statistical reports that we're now doing every year and sending to the national agencies, we see there's still a significant space for progress. As I mentioned, we also want to accelerate the adoption of the European Student Identifier. This is something that remains a very fragmented picture across the Erasmus countries. We want to make sure that we progress in that area as well. And of course, we want to make sure that we continue the collaboration with stakeholders to simplify and make the Erasmus Without Paper tools fit for purpose to support the needs of staff, of students, and of course, to support the implementation of Erasmus across the Erasmus countries. So if I can have the next slide, I will dive into a little bit more detail on each of these areas. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of the interinstitutional agreements, as I mentioned, there's been the release of version 7 for the IAA API. We can say safely that most users, over 90%, have access to the new API. This has been the result of a very close collaboration between everyone involved, between the consortium, the support services that we have, as well as the different users of Erasmus Without Paper. There are still some systems that are ongoing testings and some that are still working on their implementations. We have the relationship managers that are in very close contacts with those organizations and those systems that have not been updated yet. Most of them are in-house, I think, with the exception of one. And so it's important that we continue that work and we continue supporting this process of adoption of version 7 of the interinstitutional agreements. In what concerns us, this has been an important step in the way we release these new versions of APIs, and we want to make sure that we learn from it and that we will continue supporting the AGIs in adopting these. If I have the next slide, please, and I will tell you a little bit more about the learning agreements. So as some of you may be aware, concerning learning agreements, there is a consultation with business process owners that is ongoing. We're constantly looking at how we can improve, simplify, and even develop a more suitable framework for the exchange of digital learning agreements. Of course, we want to ensure as well that any developments in the field of learning agreements will be very closely aligned with what we have with the Erasmus Plus program guide. So this is a dialogue that we maintain with the Erasmus Plus program team within the Commission to ensure that as we move and as we look into more simplification of these processes, we're also closely aligned with the needs of the program. And our focus, as I mentioned before, on exchanging learning agreements in the current Erasmus Without Paper network remains perhaps our top priority. As I said, there's lots of space for improvement, for increase. And so we want to support the adoption of the learning agreement, the digital learning agreements exchange in the EWP network. And for that reason, we're not expecting any new major releases this year for the learning agreements API. Of course, there may be improvements, there may be minor technical improvements to the system, but we are not expecting a major release. We are expecting rather to have the system stable and focus really on supporting the use of the system by more higher education institutions. If I can have the next slide, and because this is a question that has come up on a number of occasions about these new processes or these other processes that are not the learning agreements and the interinstitutional agreements. And these questions concern mainly the nominations and the transcript of records. So it is not to say when I mentioned that we're focusing really on adoption of interinstitutional agreements and learning agreements, that is not to say that we completely forget and we won't do anything in the field of nomination and transcript of records. But what we are working on, and we will continue working on throughout 2024 at least, is that first of all, there's been an initial consultation with users concerning nomination and transcript of records. This was mainly done through surveys and user groups. And on the basis of those consultations fed into the development of business requirements that are now available for wider consultations. So these functionalities will remain in what we would describe as an early release phase for 2024 and most of 2025, we estimate. And we will take this time to continue the technical consultations and alignment on a technical level on both nomination and transcript of records. So it has to be made clear that these are functionalities that are there in early release. It is possible that changes to these existing APIs will happen in the future. We're looking at, as an estimate, to 2025 for these changes to take place. But we feel that the processes are not ready for being deployed in a stable release yet. And for that reason, we maintain them just as early release for 2024, 2025. Okay, so that's on nomination transcript of records. We thought it was useful to clarify that simply because we've had questions concerning these two areas. So I'm getting to the end of my presentation. I just want to leave you with a reminder that we have developed and we continue to update a number of communication resources and information tools for users and for national agencies as well. So you will have a number of links there with those resources, and we're always looking to hear from you as well if you feel that these are not enough and that information can be better displayed in a different format. We welcome your feedback as well. And my last slide is also an information point that some of you will be familiar with our platform on questions, the service help desk. Just to mention that there's a whole new section that has been added to that service desk, ESCI service desk, which relates specifically to the European student card. So the European student card is one area where you will see a lot of developments in the coming months, and we wanted to make sure that this area is also covered in the service desk, and we make that information easily available to all users as well. And with that, I conclude my my presentation. I hope it gives you at least an indication of what the policy priorities are for us in 2024, and we're happy to take any questions on the policy direction when we have the Q&A. And I hand it back to Nikos.
Thank you, Bruno, very much for all the updates that you shared with us and the colleagues attending the webinar. I forgot to set some ground rules and to remind the ground rules of this webinar, and I apologize for that. So any questions should be submitted through the Q&A section that you can see at the bottom of the Zoom window. So we cannot give the floor to the colleagues that have raised their hands, some of them. So please be reminded of that, and please upvote also the questions that you see already submitted, because we are going to prioritize these questions that have been upvoted. So please do go in the Q&A section and upvote or submit your own question that will be dealt at the end of the webinar. So I think we can proceed now to the next part of the presentation, which is about the European student card. So I'm going to give the floor to Antonio and Natalia for the updates on this issue. So Antonio and Natalia, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Nikos. And well, good morning, everyone. As mentioned before, so my name is Antonio Sueiro, and together with my colleague Natalia, we are working on the implementation of the European Student Card on the contractor side. And many thanks to Bruno as well, because he ended his presentation explaining about the importance of the European Student Card, which gives us a perfect transition to explain you and within the next 10 minutes, and we can maybe go to the next slide, please. Explain you, what is the European Student Card as a very, very brief context, but most importantly, where are we standing today? So what is the state of play in a nutshell for the European Student Card? And on the top of that, we thought together with the PTG Act that it would be interesting to go not just through the state of play, but to give you an insight on a specific aspect of the European Student Card, which is the governance model. This will be presented by my colleague Natalia, but here is the place where you will see how we are onboarding and making sure that we take into account the opinions of all the relevant stakeholders and how we are bringing them into the evolution and the implementation of the European Student Card. So maybe we can go to the next slide. And well, here is a very broad, and again, I understand that many of you already know very well what the European Student Card is about. But let's say the European Student Card, rather than being a card, is this idea of bringing a European dimension to existing cards, and how this idea can be useful to the three types of stakeholders that we have identified, which are both students, card issuers, and student service providers. So making sure that for students, they have a clear simplification in the access to on and off campus services, while having a card that kind of opens the door, serves as a gateway for their mobility. And in the same way that this is useful for students, this will be useful and is useful currently already for a number of card issuers and higher education institutions, because they, in the end, when the process comes to an end, they will be able to avoid issuing student cards for mobility students, because with the one that you will be receiving from the coming institution, well, they will be able to grant them the same type of services that they are granting to local students. And of course, this brings a number of advantages. And these advantages come in a secure way. So it will be easy, and of course, following all the data protection rules and that need to be respected, this will be a clear enhancement for students and for how card issuers manage their mobility students. And this will also be useful for student service providers, because they will be able to streamline, as we say here, the verification of student status in a much easier way, and overall grant their services to a wider network of users. So the benefits for these three types of stakeholders are evident on our side, and this is what we are trying to implement with the European Student Card. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So what is the state of play currently? So what were we able to implement until now? So it's interesting to keep in mind just a starting figure. So we have currently 17 countries that are implementing the European Student Card. And if you take a look to the top level, so we have 2.3 million active cards. So students with an active card being issued by a total of 275 card issuers. So it's interesting here to spend some time on the active card. So it means that when we consider that a card is active, it means that the registration has been completed in the ESC router, so in the European Student Card router, which is a database that gathers a certain amount of information that allows the verification of the student status to be carried out. So currently, These are the figures that we have. You may see in this same slide beneath that we have 823 institutions that are registered in the same European Student Card registered database. And you may see a gap between the ones that are issuing active cards and the ones that are registered. There are a number of situations where institutions can be registered without still or starting to issue active cards. But our intention throughout 2024 and until the end of the first phase of the deployment of the student card is to bridge this gap. So to have more and more institutions that are registered and have a maximum of institutions that are registered issuing active cards. So this is in a nutshell where we are standing in, well, with the latest figures from April 2024. Maybe one last figure that we have in here is the holograms that have been requested. So the European Student Card is currently constituted by an hologram, which is a visual identification of the student card that is opposed in existing cards, that goes along a QR code that allows the query of the SC router. Currently, we have issued, or that we have as requested, above 5 million holograms. And you can also see a disparity between the amount of holograms that is higher than the active cards. There are similar reasons to the ones of as for the ones of having more registered institutions in the SC router. These are linked namely with the fact that sometimes you need to order these holograms by bulk to the hologram provider. But let's say that we are streamlining things as much as possible so that we have the active cards, so the hologram plus the QR code as the way of making students benefit from it. So this is the state of play of the European Student Card in a nutshell. And perhaps we can go to the next slide. And actually here we are stating somehow again what Bruno stated at the end of his presentation, and that is the fact that we are really pushing to have communication materials as much as we can, so that not only the European Student Card message and benefits are conveyed in the clearest way, but that we also empower people that need to communicate about the European Student Card, and that so that they can explain it internally and to their colleagues. And to give you an insight of the most recent assets that we produced, for instance, we have here on the top. We have this dynamic infographic that we put in place. So how the ESC building blocks interact. So this is the first infographic that you see at the center of your page. This was an effort to put together in a kind of a storyline the relation and the importance of each one of the three building blocks of the European Student Card Initiative. So we have had in the past some questions concerning, so what is the relation then between the European Student Card and the Erasmus app? For instance, what is the difference between them? What are the mutual benefits of each one of them? And how do they relate with the Erasmus Without Paper processes? So this is an attempt to make it clear. So this, for instance, this infographic was added recently to the European Student Card Initiative portal, and it's available there if you would like to consult it. We also have another infographic more related with the European Student Card itself, which is more of a general awareness infographic about the process itself of the European Student Card, and these are also available in the website. And more recently, we have created an animation that is called "Welcome to the European Student Card," that is available in the ESCI YouTube channel and in the portal as well, and on the portal. So you will be able to consult it as from today. And this is, we really think, a really interesting asset to make understand and to communicate about the European Student Card. And lastly, the newsletter. So a newsletter that Bruno mentioned as well, that started in 2024, whose first issue was published in April, and whose next issue is going to be published in early June, where we try to explain all the aspects that have been put in place in the past months for the European Student Card Initiative as a whole. So in this aspect, I really invite you to register to the newsletter. We have currently more than 1,500 subscribers, and these figures keep rising. So I really, we really invite you to register to the newsletter, and so we can do it via the website. In any case, by the end of the presentation, just after Natalia is able to explain the governance aspect, we also have a couple of QR codes that you can scan, where you can get direct access to the newsletter page, should you like to enroll. So I think that this is all on my side, and I think that I can now hand the floor to Natalia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Antonio. So just to finalize with our presentation on the European Student Card, we wanted to present our governance model that we designed last year in 2023. It has been designed based on the PM2 methodology, that is the official methodology of the Commission. And the idea is that it includes both internal but also external stakeholders. And the idea is that with these stakeholders, we can do consultations on the future improvements of the European Student Card. So we really want to know the inputs from the main stakeholders that the European Student Card has, that Anthony has presented before, and also ensuring that there's proper communication between all the different governance bodies. So as you can see, we have different working groups, and we also have some advisory bodies that help the European Student Card to identify future improvements and upgrade a bit both the card itself, but also the system that it's behind. If we can go to the next slide, please, you will see a bit the planning of governance coordination mechanisms that we have for 2024. So the most important thing is that we already had the Business Needs Forum with alliances and also with students to gather their input at the beginning of the year. And then now we are organizing this Technical Development Forum with IT officers from the European University Alliances to gather more inputs from the technical side and identify these improvements for the future of the European Student Card. Also, the idea is that we have as well these different forums, the Business Need Forum and the Technical Development one, once the new router is launched in the future, to gather more details on the new router. And then just to highlight as well that we have a Student Card Expert Forum that we organize ad hoc based on our needs, just to gather from the main student card associations and providers the characteristics of the cards and the state of play of student cards in Europe. So we have also this into consideration when identifying improvements for the European Student Card. Yes, and then to finalize, if we can go to the last slide from governance. Yes, next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So here we have included just a few highlights on the different forums and user working groups that we have organized at the beginning of the year. So as I said, we have the Business Need Forum with European University Alliances and also one with students. We had them in February and also in April. In terms of alliances, we had 20 participants representing 8 European University Alliances. And what we wanted was to gather their feedback on the features and functionalities of the routers, but also understand potential improvements on the European Student Card related to the access and offering of services. And once we did this, we went with the students to gather their inputs. We had 8 participants from 6 different countries, and we also wanted to gather their feedback on these services that they were accessing through student cards. We got a lot of inputs from these participants, and as said, in the upcoming planning, we have the Technical Development Forum that we will organize for mid-June, where we will get these inputs from the Business Needs Forum, and we will translate it, let's say, into the technical needs and improvements of the European Student Card. And I think that until here, it's all the highlights of the European Student Card. As mentioned already before, you have this Q&A section, let's say, in the Zoom webinar. So if you have questions, please just do not hesitate to ask, and we will respond to them through this part of the Zoom webinar. Thank you. Nikos, back to you.
Thank you very much, Natalia. for the presentation, and Antonio as well, about the updates for the Erasmus student card. It's very helpful. I think the next slide has some QR codes where you can probably stay tuned, with the newsletter and the website. So, of course, there is
exactly. Thank you, Nikos, for that. Yeah.
There's also an email for support in the Erasmus student card, so you can contact also the colleagues there and ask any questions. I see that there are some upvoted questions about the card. So, Antonio and Natalia, if you allow me, I would probably pose these questions now before the Q&A that we are going to have at the end of the webinar. So, the first question comes from Elena Federle, if I pronounce it correctly. So, she says that her institution student card issuers have nothing to do with the Erasmus. How do you ensure that all institutions are informed about the Erasmus student card initiative and that most participants that are present are working with the Erasmus, and so they are not so much involved in the student cards aspect of the mobilities? If you allow, my comment is that probably this is a comprehensive information, and so probably the first point is this webinar to disseminate this information. I don't know if also Bruno, because it's a little bit of a policy issue, wants to comment something on this one. So I don't know, Antonio, if you want.
We have if I may, and Natalia can also complete. So for the first question, so when you mentioned from Elena, when you mentioned that student card issuers have nothing to do with Erasmus, the European student card is not the Erasmus student card. So it goes beyond Erasmus. It's a card that exists in order to facilitate mobility to students, not only specifically within an Erasmus program. So every time there is a mobility aspect, the student card, the European student card, can be beneficial, because if you oppose this European dimension to your existing student card in your institution, your student, when going abroad, will be benefiting from similar rights to the ones that local students are benefiting from. So, so this is the idea of the European student card, that should not be reduced only to an Erasmus classic mobility. The other aspect is that, as I understand your question, you refer to the fact of how are we informing card issuers out of some kind of it's not an Erasmus bubble, but from the people that are really working with Erasmus. We have a number of streams in our project in terms of deployment of the European student card. We have the IT part, but we also have the stakeholder engagement part, the communication and training aspects, and we are throughout, since 2023, but also this year, and making it more intense this year even, we are taking part to events, for instance, IT events or events that gather card issuers around Europe in order to explain what the European student card is about. And we are also foreseeing specific training sessions that's like the webinar that we are putting in place here today, or to which we are participating to, in order to inform about the European Student Card initiative and the European Student Card in it. So we have a rollout of the stakeholder engagement strategy and webinar sessions that we foresee, where we try to inform the large public, including card issuers or card managers, for instance, that issue cards on behalf of institutions, about the European Student Card. I don't know if this replies to your question.
Thank you very much, Antonio. I think that it covers pretty much. I see Bruno also turning on his camera. I don't know if you want to comment on that also, Bruno.
No, very briefly, I think Antonio covered it very well. I just wanted to get back to a number of comments that were put on the chat as well about the future digital card. So as Antonio explained, at the moment, the student card is part of existing cards issued by the higher education institutions. Many of these, as you probably will know, are still physical cards, but of course, the transition towards a digital European student card is something that we're working on, and we're already looking at the best ways of doing that. So that is something that will come in the future. What we're looking for in the end I think it's a greater degree of integration between all these different digital tools that have been developed in the context of the European Student Card Initiative, some of which, as Antonio explained, are they are focused on the digitalization of the Erasmus program implementation, but others, such as the student card, are broader than that. And we need our as 24-25 and the future European student card is really to get to high level.
Thank you, Bruno. Although we lost the last sentence, the connection was not so good, so it was a little bit breaking. Your mic had a problem.
Yeah. So just to say that in the future, we are looking really to reach a higher level of integration between all the different digital tools that are part of the European Student Card Initiative. And of course, the digital European Student Card is going to be a part of that.
Thank you, Bruno. And I think this probably relates also to another question we have about this digitalization process of all functionalities, let's say, and all opportunities. So there is also a question from Jean-Marie Pinseman. If there is a chance to include the European Student Card in the Erasmus Plus app. So there's a comment that this would make students' life easier to have all benefits in one place. So I don't know if there is also an answer about this, about the connection between the card and the Erasmus Plus app.
I don't know if Bruno would like to reply to this question, perhaps.
Go ahead, Antonio, go ahead.
Okay, so currently there is not a specific, there is no relation between these two. Now, so we have them as so that we have different cards, if you wish. So the European Student Card is not what is referenced as a European Student Card in Erasmus app currently. We also understand that sometimes this can create some questions, such as the one that we are receiving here. But the idea, as Bruno was just stating, is that we will go towards a unification of all the digital tools and the digital alternatives and that have been made available. So having the European Student Card both in physical and in digital, and having it these both ways, we'll be able to integrate and keep all the good things that have been produced and developed along with it in a single unified solution. So it's not done yet. We very much hope that we'll be able to integrate what exists already into a unified solution. So this is the intention.
Thank you, Antonio. No, Bruno, if you have to add something.
Maybe you have some more questions. Well, there was one question from Isabel Rego Santos from Universidade Aberta in Portugal, and I think that this was also addressed by Bruno. So student cards are no longer physical in their institutions, so we find it difficult. Give me a second to implement the European Student Card. Well, the alternative here is to go digital, and so a vast majority of cards is still physical, but the possibility of having currently a digital version of the hologram, which is a kind of an identifier, it's a kind of a logo that we have apposed in a physical card. The image of this logo can be transposed into a mobile phone along with the QR code and making the European Student Card digital. So this possibility already exists. We want to take it further in the future, but this possibility already exists, and I think that this would be the best solution in your situation. And I mean, we can, even beyond the webinar that we're having here now, if you would like to have more information about the digital alternative for the European Student Card, we'll be very happy to provide all that information. It's also available in the website. I really invite everyone to consult the website, because these features and how are they in physical or digital format, you have all this information in the portal. So I hope that this one is addressed, and maybe don't hesitate to take the floor if you want to have more information. I see a colleague that is mentioning, what about Croatia? You are completely right. Croatia is part of the countries that are using the European student card. And apologies for this little mistake in the map that is going to be corrected. Thank you very much for letting us know.
Thank you, Antonio. I think we can go. We need to go straight ahead to the next part of the presentation about the learning agreements. So, any questions that are reported, we will take them up at the end of the webinar about the card as well. Or colleagues will be also typing answers in those questions that are in the Q&A section. So, the floor now goes to Daiga Kuzmane from the European University Foundation. And she will present us the user consultation on the learning agreements and next steps. So, Daiga, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Nikos. And indeed, it will be, my presentation will be a relatively short one, but it's an important topic, and it's important to make sure that you are informed about what is going on this front. And so, yeah, we'll talk about the next steps in the learning agreement side. And as now, after the completion of the version 7 for the interinstitutional agreement updates, further improvements are considered here. And thanks a lot indeed for the context slide, as it's important to highlight indeed where we are, and as those further updates would be building on the experience of more than 300,000 digital learning agreements that have already been exchanged by the EWP network. And as more than 2,700 higher education institutions are already exchanging digital learning agreements via the EWP. And this is covering a vast majority of the population that are specifically exchanging students for study mobility. But of course, as Bruno highlighted, it is important to keep into consideration that it's not yet 100%. And as for interoperability, it takes two to tango. It is, of course, another important aspect to work towards. But it is a very significant population that has already been reached. And the current numbers really illustrate that we have gone a long way. And what is also very important to highlight is that the EWP assessment report already in 2022 illustrated that learning agreements exchanges are all in all working smoothly. And these annual surveys are taking into consideration all of the key points. For example, statistics, the testing results, the error reports, of course, also service desk tickets and then qualitative information from the work of the relationship managers. And they're outlining indeed the situation and kind of giving an overview where we are. And why am I stressing this? And here, if you could go to the next slide. The two key principles that will apply to these next steps is first and foremost user-centeredness, as our goal, as always, is to put the user needs at the center of the process and designing the solutions that are based on their feedback. And second of all, also extreme caution, because making changes to the process that works well is something that needs to be also approached with a considerable care and in a laser-focused manner, as it is of utmost importance to avoid any degradation of services. So in other words, it would be specific improvements and not a revolution. And currently discussions are on the way regarding what is the scope of the changes. And if you could go to the next slide. As also already pointed out, this would be carefully discussed within the EWP governance bodies, and the BPO group, which is the business process owners, consisting of the international relations officers, will be one of the key pillars there, but also wider community will be involved here, and via qualitative methods such as focus groups, but also quantitative consultations. And this is indeed a great opportunity to further improve things and do so together and joining forces with us. So to facilitate this, and here again, I will ask you to go to the next slide. I would invite you to join the EWP user groups if that is not the case already now that you are part of it and you're already active there. It's a Slack space that allows for indeed exchanging questions, but also having discussions. It has different sections depending on what kind of tools you're using, but also, of course, also general and announcement channels. Here, if you're scanning the QR code, you'll be finding more information on how exactly to join, also code of conduct and more information about the way it's being run. And while you're doing it, what I would also still want to highlight again is that the progress that we have achieved till now and the need for the trusted and stable EWP network environment will be a critical factor when further updates are considered. And I would repeat that it would not constitute a revolution, but a relatively small update, as this should not hamper any further implementation of the learning agreements in the digital form. Quite the opposite, assuring that the learning agreement management process is becoming ever smoother. So stay tuned for more information, and thanks a lot. That will be it from my side.
Thank you very much, Daiga, for the very short and concise presentation on the future improvements and consultations on the learning agreement. I would like to remind all participants and attendees that all resources, most of the resources are also available in the chat. So you have the links to go to the European Student Card Initiative portal, to the service desk, to subscribe to the newsletter, and of course, to view this presentation and webinar once again through the YouTube channel and the recording that will be available there. The next presentation is from João Bacelar from the European University Foundation as well, about the updates on the mandatory business requirements for nominations and transcript of records. So, João, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nikos. Good afternoon to all of the colleagues that have tuned in. And it's my pleasure to give you a little bit of a sneak peek into the work that we've been doing with regards to EWP nominations and transfer of records. Please keep in mind what Bruno said at the very beginning, which is this is work that will bear fruit, not immediately, but down the road. But in order to make sure that it bears the kind of fruits that we hope, preparatory work is in order. Now, this work has focused on the mandatory business requirements, and because I know there's a lot of jargon in all EWP discussions, just a quick reminder of what this is. This was something that was introduced in 2022 at the time that we were dealing with the fact that a number of providers had issues with their implementation of the interinstitutional agreements, which caused interoperability issues, which have been discussed to a significant extent in previous webinars. Now, what happened is that providing a set of mandatory business requirements essentially is something that accompanies the technical specification that the IT teams have to implement. And this has proven to be really very important to improve the quality of those implementations. And in essence, the mandatory business requirements are guidelines that are defined from the perspective of users. But not just from the perspective of users, also defined with the input of the users. So if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So how do we get your feedback to shape this kind of documentation? Well, very simply, in the case of nominations and transcripts, we organized the biggest consultation in this decade in EWP. We started with the governance bodies that are in place. We have notably a group of really committed IROs that constitute what we call the Business Process Owners Expert Group. And from there, we continued working to the EWP user groups that Daiga mentioned in the previous presentation. There are several surveys that were carried out, and there was a lot of feedback, which we're very, very thankful for. We had around 200 colleagues from 250 HEIs contributing, giving their views. And this is incredibly important because I think most colleagues attending the webinar probably have seen, are familiar with a template for learning agreements or interinstitutional agreements. But I'd be willing to bet that not a single one of you has seen a template for nominations, because there isn't one. So we have a very fragmented way to handle nominations. And this is why all of this feedback, both the quality and the quantity, was really important for us to model business requirements that were relevant and well adjusted to the needs and the practices of universities. Now, the bulk of this work happened already last year. The mandatory business requirements were compiled in the beginning of 2024. They were approved by DGAC in roughly the middle of April. And so what we are presenting here is something that is already public, that has already been published a few weeks ago. So take it as providing a bit of context and what it is, what is the importance. And so if I could have the next slide, maybe I would add a few words about some of the key messages, some of the key conclusions that the consultation brought forward and that have been incorporated in the MBR, Mandatory Business Requirements. The first message is very simple, is that nominations themselves need to be simple. They need to be focused on a single data set that enables nominations to be done consistently to all of your partners, but that is not so minimal, so compact that would make it impossible for a receiving higher education institution to accept, to confirm a nomination. So it's about striking a delicate balance, and this is a point I will come back to. As Bruno already mentioned in the opening of the webinar, there is something called European Student Identifier, which you will see features among the requirements to make a nomination. So this is an identifier which will become ever more important. And here the message is very clear. If in the future you want to take advantage of using EWP nominations, please make sure that you are issuing European Student Identifier to your students. Many of you will do it via EduGain. Some of you will do it via one of several IDPs of last resort that are already in place. But this is not the only identifier that matters, that is important. There is also the idea of the interinstitutional agreement, because a key part of streamlining this process is to make sure that the nomination is done in the context of an existing interinstitutional agreement and the requirements stated therein. So the two need to be combined, linked, if you will, when possible. Obviously, this is possible when the interinstitutional agreements have been approved to EWP. We are aware that that's not the case for all the interinstitutional agreements, but this is a step-by-step process. Now, what happens before the nomination is not regulated in any way. Back to the previous slide, thank you. So what happens before the nomination is not regulated by EWP. What is important is that you know which data points you need to be able to share with your partner. Then there are many, many ways to organize internal selection processes. There are principles, of course, that are stated in the Erasmus Charter. But there's a lot of autonomy for higher education institutions to organize this step as they see fit. And the same is true with regards to what happens after nominations. Many higher education institutions might require more data points, for example, to enroll the students. And so the application to the receiving institution, if necessary, it's also something that you have a lot of latitude to organize. With all of this autonomy, there's still one point that I think it's very important, which is that the status of a nomination done via EWP is unequivocal. Whether it has been sent, whether it has been received, approved, rejected, this must be very clear, also so that we can be transparent towards the students. And this is something that is assured by the mandatory business requirements and by the specifications. And now on to the next slide, to give you a little bit of sneak peek of what is this compact data set we're talking about. So what we've come to, and there is a lot of work and discussion going into this, is 18 data points that constitute a nomination made via EWP. These are the mandatory points. There are some optional points which you'll find in the documentation. The first 7 data points are personal identification data, the first and last name of the student, European Student Identifier as mentioned, the date of birth, the gender, nationality, and the email address. The remaining 11 data points, I've mentioned some of them before, but this has to do with defining the mobility process as such, so which is the sending and the receiving institution. Some of this will be obvious, obviously. The ID of the interinstitutional agreement and the sending and receiving AGI, the ISCAT codes of the IAA and of the field of study of the student, EQF levels, academic year, terms, whether it's a study or traineeship mobility, and whether it's a long, short, or doctoral mobility. Now, this is, as I said, something that has taken a lot of discussion. I'd also like to give a shout out to the colleague that facilitated this entire process because he's away. A lot of discussion went into it. So the colleague in question is Paul Leys from Ghent University, that some of you will know. Fantastic team working on this, Steiger, Arpe, Monica Malgorjat, and other colleagues. Maybe some of you will ask yourselves, could we have 16 instead of 18 data points, or should it be 20 instead of 18? Let's be very honest, this is a compromise, but it's a compromise that moves the game significantly from where we are. So without further ado, on to the next slide, and to give you a little bit of insight on what are the next steps. So one of the interesting findings of the consultation is that it validated to a very large extent, although with some important differences that I've tried to highlight in the previous slide, that this builds nicely on technical solutions that already exist. And in order for you to be able to use nominations in the next months or years, the technical solutions infrastructure needs to be ready and up to spec. And so based on the MBRs, what we've done is to adjust the technical specifications. And this is something that we will already present at the DWP technical community tomorrow, alongside with the next steps. Now, we also know that there are probably close to 90% of HEIs that already have nomination, EWP nomination functionality in the systems that you're using. And in previous webinars, we talked about whether some of you might be trying it out. To be very clear, we are not advising for you to put all of our outgoing students in this nomination. I think Bruno covered the point very elegantly as well. This is not where we're at. But if you have the functionality and you might want to give your provider a few months to make this minor adjustments if necessary. If you're trying this out, and we know that some colleagues do so in a small scale with other colleagues, just to see if it works or if it doesn't, please let us know. Please let us know if it worked, if it didn't work, if it didn't, why so. Because this is about using the time that we have to take a more assertive approach to get as much information on how things are going and whether they're meeting expectations. So feel welcome to use the ASCII service desk for this purpose. Good feedback, bad feedback, all of it is very valuable. As you might have gathered, and I cannot stress this enough, this is not about setting deadlines. There are no deadlines to start using any of this functionality in a mandatory fashion. It's really about essentially following due process, making sure that we take all the steps to have something that works well, that meets expectations, that has the kind of impact that we think it needs to have, that works, for example, as smoothly or even better than the learning agreement. And this brings me to my concluding slide. If I could have the next one, please. So summing it up in a nutshell, a few weeks ago in a meeting, a colleague asked me, oh, we already have technical solutions for nominations since a few years. Looking into business requirements feels like a step back. And I can understand how the colleague felt like that, because some of us want to move forward rather than backwards. But this might be a case of taking a step back in order to take 2 steps forward. It is an important moment. This is why we're presenting it today. It's validation from the community as to how this should work in the future. And I think we all know very well that, for 30 years, we've been doing nominations in 300 or even 3,000 different ways, different partners, different sets of data. So this is going to be a big step when it happens, and it should happen gradually. And it's actually more than standardization, which is what the project is at its core. This is actually a radical simplification of the processes that we currently have in place. So there's a journey to make. We need to approach this together. Again, your input has been very important. We need to strike a good balance between a measure of caution, but also a measure of enthusiasm, because as Daiga said, ensuring that things work well is the top priority. And since I've spent all of this presentation talking about nominations, maybe I should add a few words about the transfer of records, which was also in the title. So in a nutshell, the maturity, the process and the work that has been done for the nominations was done exactly in the same way for the transfer of records. They share similar characteristics at several levels, notably the way they're streamlined or regulated. But as we've done in previous webinars, there is a very important message when it comes to transfer of records, because it is one more step. It's one more step in the sense that it's not just simplification, but potentially automation of this process, in the sense that if we do it right, this is something that will in the future hopefully disappear from the horizon, from the landscape of the work that international relations officers need to do. But for this to be the case, we really urge you to prepare for the transcripts by doing something very simple. Ask yourselves and your colleagues and your teams at your institutions, where are the transcripts stored? in which tool, in which database, and see how that tool database system can eventually be connected to EWP. If you don't this, if we take shortcuts, the efficiency gains are obviously going to be much lower. And this is what we mean by a quick needs analysis. So probably you're dealing with many other issues. This is not necessarily a top priority, but I think it's really important to stress that is a step that everyone should consider, should take. And I end in the next slide, please, with the links to the mandatory business requirements for nominations, for transfer of records, and also for the ESCI service desk, which the colleagues from Lot 2 already referred to, so that you can share any feedback and also any questions you might have. So I think we will have a little bit of time for questions. So thank you very much, and back to you, Nikos.
Thank you very much, Joao, for your presentation as well, for the mandatory business requirements. It was, I think, very helpful to have a look into this information, and so all colleagues can take action on them. I think we have concluded with the presentation, so it's time to go to the Q&A section with all the upvoted questions. Once again, as I mentioned at the beginning, all questions have to be submitted through the Q&A section and upvote those ones that seem to you more relevant. So going directly to the first upvoted question from Cristina Colombo. I see from the comment and the question from Italy. And so what she mentions, to put it in a nutshell, is that there is an issue reaching out the governance of the universities, the governing bodies of the universities. She mentions that in these in sessions and webinars are only usually international offices. The question is how the Commission is addressing the governing bodies of the universities about these changes and about the implementation of the European Student Card and the WP. I don't know who wants to take the floor, probably Bruno, I don't know, or Harpa. Yes, Harpa?
I can comment on this, and hello everyone. It's kind of funny that you ask this because I'm coming to you from Italy, where I'm staying now, because tomorrow we have an event in Italy where we are bringing together international relations officers, but also the Italian Rectors Conference, rectors of universities, and the ministry together. We've heard from Italy, but also many other countries, that international relations officers feel a bit left alone to be informed about the ESCI initiative and to implement it in their universities. So one of the things that we have been doing is organizing national level events to bring together rectors also and other leadership and other stakeholders at the national level. And we will continue to do this in the weeks and months to come. If you as an IRO have ideas on what is a good way to reach out to rectors and get them more involved, or other leadership in your universities, feel free to share those ideas with us, for example, in the EWP user groups. So I hope that answers the question. We're aware that there is a need to discuss more frequently with rectors, and we're doing now outreach activities that focus on this.
Can I just add thank you, Arpa. Just one point that is important, I think, for the colleagues in the higher education institutions to understand as well. As European Commission, our main point of contact are the national agencies. So we have to work very closely with the national agencies, which we are doing, as amongst other things, as Arpa mentioned, through the organizations of these national days, ESCI national days or EWP national days. But we need to work through them and provide them also the right tools for them to reach out at the right level of the different higher education institutions in your country. And in addition to the EWP days that Arpa is mentioning, we're also maintaining this dialogue with the NAs, which is relatively constant. Only this week, for example, we have another discussion tomorrow with the national agency representatives on the overall European Student Card initiative, including the EWP, but also the student card, etc. And we will invite them again to work together with us to make sure that we're reaching wider and more deeply into the different higher education institutions in order to them to have all the tools they need to implement the different aspects of the ESCI project. But our focus as European Commission is working with the national agencies and ensuring the national agencies have the tools to have this cooperation with the higher education institutions.
Thank you very much, both of you. I think that it's covered from different levels, on the national level and the ESCI level with the events. Going to the next question, we have Jean-Marie Pinsemen asking about learning agreement modifications, and she comments that it's still very confusing with the LAs being edited when just modifications were required. The question ends with, since learning agreements are managed by the home institution, the host institution and the student, modus operandi need to be clearer. I don't know if probably João wants to take this up. Yes?
Sure. Thank you, Nikos, and thank you, Jean-Marie, for the question. So I think that in the chat, the colleagues have already shared the LA user guide, and this is something of a very practical, hands-on guidance on how to use learning agreements digitally. So I don't think that there is inability to process learning agreements correctly via WP. There's probably a learning curve. And so I thank you for making this point, because it's important that we understand what is failing so that we can figure out how to fix it. If the resources are there, if the technical solution is not broken, we could be looking into questions also of training the colleagues so that this can move a little bit further, but also the discussions within our community, because we know that's also a powerful way to build a shared understanding in which way to move. I don't think I have a silver bullet to put on the table. I really just appreciate that that this was flagged and that we can work all on it.
Okay, thank you very much, João. I suppose that Jean-Marie is covered. Keeping on the same issue about the learning agreements, we also have a question from Nina Butke about the learning agreements and two main obstacles that she mentions about the adoption and based on her experience. So the first one is partner higher education institutions not participating create extra work for the IROs. I suppose this is the case. Yes, of course. And second point is that changes to existing digital learning agreements remain a lot more frail than concluding the first version. Approximately 70 to 80% of all learning agreements technically not working are changes to existing learning agreements. It would be helpful if you could take a closer look into the processes, technical implementation of changes to learning agreements. I think the second part probably has already been answered by João. About the first part, I don't know, Harpa, if you want to take the floor.
Yeah, just very briefly indeed. As Bruno mentioned at the start of the webinar, this is a key priority in 2024. We recognize that probably the most urgent thing to do about learning agreements is to make sure that we bridge the gap and everyone is exchanging learning agreements exclusively through the network. And until we do so, every university is facing, to some extent, fragmented processes around exchanging learning agreements. And it can also create double work for students, because they might have created their learning agreement in one system and then they're being asked to resubmit it through some other system or through PDF or to recreate the learning agreement. So of course, this is not helping us in creating more efficiency. And that's why this is a key focus for 2024, and why the work that we're doing with the ANAs to reach out to universities at the national level, this is the primary focus of that work. In terms of the learning agreements and those issues, indeed, this is what we are looking for in terms of improving things with the learning agreements and the guide for using the learning agreements. We did a lot of consultations around that and we mapped some issues. I am aware that there are some issues relating to the updating of learning agreements, but I think this is indeed something we can take a closer look at as part of this LA consultation to really see what are the bugs there that are causing some issues. From where I'm sitting, one of the main issues is that students, rather than actually following up with changing the learning agreement, they might create a new one, and this causes confusion in the system. So that's one issue that we have our eye on, but we can look at further issues. So thank you for flagging this. And I just take this opportunity to invite colleagues to come to the user groups and to write out these specific cases, because it's incredibly helpful for us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Harpa, a lot about answering the question of Nina. Another question that relates to digital learning agreements is about the traineeships and whether it would be available and possible for traineeships to have digital learning agreements. I don't know if you can want also to take this one up and close the learning agreements part for the time being.
Yes, I can take this one as well. Just to say, I mean, we can't say for sure at this moment when we will have learning agreements for traineeships. What I can say is that this is in scope of the ESCI initiative. We want to have all types of mobilities under Erasmus Plus implemented through a digital and streamlined and easy to use way for all universities. The priority remains on intra-European student mobility for studies. And as you know, as part of this webinar, we're not there yet. So until we have fully digitalized this bulk of the program, this is where most of the administrative burden lies. Once we are done with that, then we can look into digitalizing further options. So just to say that this is still very much in scope of the initiative, but as of now, it's not a priority until we are done with the student mobility for studies part.
Thank you very much, Harpa, for this one as well. I think we can now switch a little bit, going back to the European student card and colleagues from this lot, Antonio and Natalia. So there is a question/comment from Angela McKenna about the communication with the technical officers, records managers who are responsible for the cards, the student cards in higher education institutions. So she asked not to rely solely on mobility officers. I think that Antonio, Natalia, you have already covered this with the outreach plan that we have.
Exactly. So in terms of the outreach and the engagement and communication activities, we not only rely on international mobility officers, we also target the IT community and the ones who are managing the European Student Card. So there are several ways to do so. For instance, in terms of the events that we're able to attend, for instance, take umbrella organizations for IT development like UNIS, for instance. We are very present in this type of event where we can communicate directly and technically with IT developers. And something that another aspect that we can take into account is linked to what Natalia explained is the governance structure, and we have within our own governance structure, we have what we call the technical develop forum. So where is that corresponds exactly to that question that you are asking. So we want to bring IT colleagues together to explain and discuss further about the implementation of the European Student Card. So we are really relying on this large spectrum of stakeholders, let's say, to the deployment of the European Student Card. So that I hope replies to your question, and we really keep that in mind in all the activities that we develop.
Thank you, Antonio. And so I suppose that there will be more and more information going to the IT colleagues in the universities. The next question is about the transcript of records, as I see it, because Elena Orloviene is a little bit surprised with the simplification mentioned from Joao previously, I suppose, with the mandatory business requirements. So she's asking whether the grades will be added to EWP from the international officers. I suppose there is an answer from Joao. So Joao, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nikos. And Elena, thank you for your question, because it gives me the opportunity to repeat what I said at the end of the presentation. If you want transfer of records to be not just simplified, but automated, which means exactly avoiding what you're describing of having to manually inject grades or, basically be pushing buttons depending on the system you have. The key really is to connect where these data points are stored in your university so that they can be exchanged digitally and automatically. So I completely agree with you. We should be careful of this. That's the whole point of I was trying to stress, is to say, well, be mindful how you approach, because you're not under a deadline, you have time to prepare. Be very mindful how you approach this so to make it work for you. The costs of cutting corners in this respect will be that you will not indeed simplify. But I think we have options on the table that, at least for the majority of universities, could allow to do this in a very efficient, smart way.
Thank you very much, Joao. I think this covers all. Unfortunately, simplification requires a lot of hard work for preparation or to have the simplification results. So yeah, this is also a task that colleagues have to do with the internal procedures so as to be able to connect with the WP network. The next question comes is about the IIA's version 7, the API version 7, and is from Ratimira Simundic. Mentions that there are many more universities that are not back after version 7 has been implemented. When refreshing, there is a lot of partner ID not covered coming back to them. She also shared, if I remember correctly, a list of these universities that they have the issue. Joao, an answer to this one?
Certainly. So Ratimira, thank you for the question. I think Bruno touched upon this in the very beginning of the webinar when he presented the numbers of which providers have undergone testing, because in order to remain in EWP for IAs, the version 7 needs to be tested. And there is a list of around 20 nodes that are not there yet. One of the good things, one of the principles of EWP is that data should be open, should be transparent. So I'm going to add in the chat the link to where the testing reports are. And here, I'm not saying that you have to do this, obviously, but I'm saying that if you want to cross-check if one of your partners might be absent because of testing still being underway or awaiting their readiness, this is one place you can do. You can combine this with the stats portal in case you know which system your partner is using. If you detect a university that in principle has cleared testing, uses a system that is ready, that is available in the network, but the errors that you mentioned are being returned, please let us know. Ask a service desk. We need to get an animated GIF to promote it at the end of this question so that we have the link at your fingertips. That could be an error. It could be other things as well. It could be that technically they're ready, but they're still finishing the implementation to be able to use it 100%. But that's already something that we need to see on a case-by-case basis. I'm sorry if I missed a list of the institutions. In any case, it's something that would be difficult to control on the spot during the webinar. So if there is a need, don't hesitate to reach out to see what's going on. But I think this is the basic logic way how to approach it.
Thank you, Joao, for answering, I hope, sufficiently Satamira's question. The next voted question, we are going now to the nominations side of things and the mandatory business requirements that you have shared before. So Julia Fonseca mentioned that from her experience, partner universities are asking nominations for nomination procedures, more and more complicated data. So the question is whether there could be a nomination process guidelines while EWP nominations are being implemented, and there should be an agreement on the data that universities provide and share. Already covered from your presentation, but the floor is yours for further clarifications.
No, I can only agree with Julia, and thank you for making that point. We know that it's a system where entropy tends to increase, so we have to take decisive action to counter it. And this is really, I think, the key message of the mandatory business requirements. It's a compromise as to how nominations will be done to all the partners, to all of the program countries, as far as Erasmus mobilities are concerned. I think in many ways, when you consider this growing complexity that you describe and that we're familiar with, it's also a quantum leap. So it's also important, and I'm linking back again with Bruno, for us to internalize that there's a change of paradigm as how we're going to move forward with nominations. It affects as well our internal organization of work. When you mentioned that different faculties might have different requirements. And so this is what we're trying to cover when I said there's a nomination, and that's a very standard data set and procedure. There are things that happen before, and there are things that happen after the nomination. And so we need to reorganize, to optimize things to make it work. It's an endeavor, but it's an exciting endeavor. I think it's something to look forward, because what I pick up from Julia and other colleagues is that this will make a difference. And if we do it right, it will make a very big positive difference.
Thank you, Joao. The next question comes from Lola Lanier about the European student card. So I think that Antonio or Natalia can reply to this one. So if there is any feedback from higher education institutions about how the implementation of the European student card, opposed to a basic student card, impacted the cost of the cards for the higher education institutions and the students. I don't know, Antonio, if you can answer this one.
So in this case, so we don't have a specific study on one institution that we could share with you now. What we can perhaps say is referring to the costs of issuing the card, and then we can multiply by the number of students that you have. Currently, the hologram that we are referring to has a cost of 8 cents. So meaning that for 1,000 cards, the cost of ordering an hologram would be of 80 euros for 1,000 physical cards. I mean, for digital cards, there will be no cost because it's not an hologram that you'll be ordering. It's an image that you will be uploading in a mobile phone. And the creation of the QR code via the database, so the ESC router, is done just by connecting to the database. So the costs of issuing a physical card are we believe low, or rather low, and this would be the impact. This would give you an idea of the costs that it would take to phase in to this European dimension in your student card, and so this is a cost for the card issuer, for the institution that is producing the card. Then how this cost translates into a student. So we believe that this, as this is a very low cost for having the hologram, this would not represent a substantial increase in the final cost of the card for the student. So this, I think, these are the elements that we can provide concerning the costs of the implementation of the card.
Okay, thank you very much, Antonio, for the clarifications. The next question, we have just 3 minutes for the Q&A section to finish this webinar. So let's take 1 or 2 questions. So the next comes from Pauline Marceau. Needs confirmation that nominating students through EWP, the students first needs to apply on the Erasmus Plus app. So it's a connection about the Erasmus Plus app and the nomination / application procedure. I don't know who wants to take this up. Harpa?
Yeah, I can take this. So indeed, Pauline, I can confirm that in how the nomination process is currently set up in the dashboard, this is how it works. It is designed, of course, the scope of the dashboard was to provide a system to universities that don't have any other system to handle their student mobility administration. Therefore, that's how the nominations are handled. The students need to apply, and from there, all of the data flows into the nomination process. Now, in terms of the consultations that we did in relation to the mandatory business requirements, there were a lot of universities that pointed out that they are using the dashboard, and for them this process is not feasible. They would prefer to be able to upload the CVS file to the system to be able to nominate students. So this is something that we have taken note of. We are looking into this, but we are aware. So I can confirm that this is how the process is set up now. And I can confirm we are aware that this is not necessarily what is feasible for many universities that currently are using the dashboard. Of course, that would be maybe a moment in time to reflect and think if maybe it's appropriate to go to another solution for your university, but we will keep the community, of course, informed about this.
Okay, thank you very much, Harpa, answering the question from Pauline. So a next question that is probably relevant and has to do about the transcript of records is about the processes. The question from Solia Rihanen and the Emirates project. It's a project that has already developed some standards within this and processes. So the question is whether the exchange of transcripts will be based on this process of the Emirates project. So, João, probably you can provide us an answer to this one.
I can try. So thank you for the question. I flagged this to try to answer live because it's something that we sometimes get, notably from colleagues in Scandinavia. So just a little bit of clarity on the complementarity and the overlap between what TWP does and MREX do, because there are things that are common. For example, the technical standards are the same. We use something called the ELMO, but this is a bit of a technicality, and we both use it, but the use cases are different. MREX is about getting a transfer of records, and I'm not an MREX expert, by the way, so if any colleague works on that, wants to correct me, please don't hesitate, but historically, MREX is about getting a transfer of records from the university to the student. And that's something that UWP is not catering to. UWP is focused on getting a transfer of records from one university or education institution directly into the other education institution for reasons that are too obvious to explain. Now, this can complement each other, and it's also important to notice that we've already taken steps to support universities that might want to use both. One of the issues in the past was that MREX and UWP were separate infrastructures. Currently, if you are in UWP, you can add the MREX functionality from within the same network because there is merit in, depending on your needs, to be able to use one or the other. And that's it in a nutshell. So there are commonalities, but it's not entirely accurate to say that we can just use MREX because what we're trying to solve is a slightly different problem. And this has nothing to do with which one is more pressing. It really depends how you set up your processes. Thanks, Nikos.
Thank you also, João, for the feedback. I think the other upvoted questions are not so questions, but comments from Manuela Locatelli. So noted about the necessity of the nominations, of the implementation of the nominations API, and also about the lack of flexibility probably during implementation of AAIs. Also, there is a comment from Ivana Mazzi about the deadlines for all next steps. I think that Bruno at the beginning presented the timeline. I don't know, Bruno, if you want to mention something, or Harpa probably, about the clear and reasonable deadlines that Ivana requests.
Well, I can take the floor maybe, and Bruno complement, but just to say that we have completely revised the approach to deadlines. So I hope this is clear, and this is why we're not coming out here and saying, by September 25, you should all have nominations, for example. How we approach this is to say, now we have defined mandatory business requirements. That means we can start a discussion with all of the technical teams in terms of confirming and updating specifications. Then we will move to, at a later stage, of implementing and testing and so on and so forth. Only when we know that things are ready can we discuss within the community if there should be any kind of timeline for implementation. And also in terms of the other processes, I saw other questions. When would student card become mandatory? When will something else become mandatory? I think what is important is that everyone within EDGE is committed to implementing the digital processes and actively work towards that. But of course, there is, we are trying to be as flexible and supportive as we can be to get everyone to do it as soon as possible. I think now the key issue is not so much, is there a deadline from the Commission to do something by some point in time? But as you can see from the discussions today, the need really comes now from the community and your partners. So I think it needs to be a community effort to try to get across the finish line as soon as possible. Everyone can benefit from the investments that they've made in digital processes. So I hope that answers the question. We keep you informed about how we're progressing on the work plan. And once we get to a stage where things have been confirmed, there could be a discussion with the community to have some kind of target for having everyone implement certain processes. But as of now, there are no hard deadlines.
I don't know, Bruno, if you want to add something?
I would just add that yeah, very quickly, I think Arpa covered it. The reason why it's probably not very useful to have deadlines, if we know that some of these elements will not depend on ourselves. We may have deadlines if they're not going to be met. we're not going to be met in many cases because other institutions are not able to and creates frustration with everyone. And so what ARPA explained is that what we're committed to is not deadlines, is a set of principles where we commit to a sequence of logical steps that will allow everyone to move forward in the right direction. And so that's the main principle that we have now.
Okay, thank you, Bruno, very much. And with all this said, I think that it's time to conclude this webinar. Thank you all for joining. It was a great pleasure seeing you all being here and submitting your questions. We hope that was informative enough for all of you. So we will see you again at another version, another edition of the webinar or in the town hall meetings that will follow probably in the next academic year. So thank you very much. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us.